Come with me if you want a ranking.
Welcome to my ranking of the Terminator films, and this is a big series for me. This is one of my favourite franchises outside of horror, and I've been with the Terminator series pretty much since the beginning. I was too young to have seen the first one at the cinema. I was about 5, but my parents rented it as soon as it was available on home video, and they let me watch it. They probably shouldn't have done, but I think they just considered it to be more of an action film than a horror film because they never used to let me watch horror films. Somehow this one slipped through the net, even though it was a really violent film. But it really captured my imagination. I can remember going to school and mentioning this film to other kids, and they had no clue what I was talking about. I was absolutely over the moon when I found out that they were doing a second one. And then later down the line, Terminator 3 was the first one I saw at the cinema as an adult, and so on and so on. And even in the present day, I've got so much enthusiasm for this series. If they announced that they were doing a seventh film today, I would be really excited, though I don't think we'll be seeing that anytime soon if the box office for the previous one is any indication. So let's get into the ranking and find out what is my sixth and therefore least favourite of these. I don't hate this one like some people. I find it perfectly enjoyable. I've seen it a couple of times and enjoyed it on both occasions. I do think the plot gets a little bit too convoluted for a Terminator film, and I don't think it was very well cast. I think this film used a lot of actors that were maybe hot in Hollywood at the time, but maybe weren't right for these roles. I think Dark Fate cast its characters a lot better, albeit perhaps with lesser known names. I do really like the ridiculousness of the Terminator that we get towards the end of this, though. It's probably the most impossible to kill Terminator they've ever put on the screen, but just very, very fun. I can absolutely sit through this movie and have a good time. It's just not quite up to the standard of some of the later ones you're going to see on this ranking. I don't really think there's much difference quality wise between this and Genesis. I'll put this one ahead just because it's the only one in the series which is fully set in the future. And for the longest time, I was clamoring for a film like this in this franchise. When I was at high school and we used to talk about the Terminator films, I always used to say if they do a Terminator 3, they've got to set it in the future, do something different. They didn't listen to me for when they did Terminator 3, but they did when it came to the fourth one, albeit I had to wait for 2009 to finally get a film like this. And I think the results were sort of mixed. I think as an action film, it's got some great sequences in it. Parts of it don't work in terms of the story and the characters. It does feel like the movie is lacking a bit of soul somehow. And from playing the Terminator Resistance game a couple of years ago, that made me think that maybe Salvation could have done with going back to being more of a sci-fi horror film like the original Terminator, rather than be this Edge of Tomorrow type film. Because Terminator Resistance is completely set in the future, but it's in the style of the first Terminator. And when I look back on Salvation, I just think it might have been suited to being a bit more like that. But it's still all right, but it's nowhere near the top of this ranking. So now we're starting to really go up a bit in terms of the quality because I think this film is hugely underrated. Having said that, my first viewing wasn't a great one. I'd been hanging out with my friends one afternoon and probably drunk a bit too much. So by the time I got to the cinema, I was very tipsy and I ended up falling asleep for about 5 minutes in the middle of the film. Not because I was bored, I just had a little bit too much to drink. So I suddenly had that awkward moment where you go, and then you just hope that no one's heard you or anything like that. So I saw most of the film anyway, but when I came out, I was just a bit underwhelmed because it didn't match up to the first two films. And I didn't watch it after that for the longest time. And then I think when Salvation came out, I finally gave it another chance and thought to myself, actually, this is pretty damn good as long as you can get over the fact that it's not made in that Cameron style. And every time I've watched the film since then, it's got gradually better and better for me. I think this film has got some great characters in it who actually have been well cast. I think Claire Danes is very good. I think the ending is very bold. It goes places that Terminator 2 dared not to. And the military factory, where you see all the original Skynet robots in their very basic form, that was really jarring the first time I saw it in the cinema, but on repeat viewings, it gets a lot better. So I really enjoy this film now. I think Arnie somehow looks really good in it as well, and I think this one definitely deserves to be reappraised, and it's my number 4 today. Okay, now we're into the frigging awesome ones, and I absolutely love this movie. Let me just say, I'm surprised it didn't do better than it did, especially critically. I guess box office wise, if there's no demand or nostalgia for Terminator films anymore, that's one thing. But in terms of the quality of the movie itself, I'm surprised that more fans don't like this. I'm surprised critics didn't like it more because I was just blown away watching this movie. I mean, I was on the edge of my seat all the way through, and I felt a certain sense of dread for the characters in this that I'd not felt since T2. I mean, you know, that sense of helplessness for them, that this unstoppable machine is coming for them, and what the hell are they going to do about it? How are they going to get out of this? It was just an amazing feeling. And I think what added to my emotion watching it was the fact that me and my dad used to really like the Terminator films for like years and years and years as I was growing up, but he sadly passed away in 2018, so we didn't quite get to watch this new one, Dark Fate. So it was a weird feeling for me going to watch this film, seeing how awesome it was, in my opinion, and realizing that my dad would never get to see it. Genesis was his last one. I don't think he really cared about that one. So it's kind of sad from that point of view, but I think this film is absolutely terrific. The female hybrid Terminator, I guess she's more human than Terminator. What an amazing character. I mean, just one of the most kick-ass female characters that I've ever seen in a movie. And I love the ending to this one as well. I think it's a better ending than what you get in T2. And all the characters just say enough's enough. We're going to stand our ground and have one gigantic fight. I think that was pretty amazing as well. I don't get a lot of movies on 4K, but this is one I'm planning to because I just think it'll look even more terrific on that format. So yeah, call me a big fan of Dark Fate, but it can't quite match up to the original two classics. So let's find out now which one I've got at number 2. So I've got Terminator 2 in second place, although being honest, throughout the years, I've constantly gone back and forth as to which is my favourite out of these top two films. For many years, here and there, Terminator 2 has been my favourite. It just isn't right now. But I love this film. I love the extended cut of this film. When I first saw this with my parents, sort of, it would have been 91, just after it came out, that night when I went to bed, when I walked up the stairs, having just digested this movie, I was just in a daze as to how good it was and how it had just blown away all my senses. It was just absolutely incredible. If you want to hear what my favourite scene in the movie is, it's when they bust Sarah out of the asylum place. I just think there's some amazing stuff in that scene. But all the way through the film, it's just one great bit after another. It's just an amazingly epic action sci-fi film, one of the best ever made, but it's only second today. So here we have it, Terminator 1, my favourite of this series, officially, for now, today. It was probably the first horror film I ever saw. I mean, you absolutely have to call this half a sci-fi film, half a horror film. If this isn't the first horror film I ever saw, I don't know what is, and that's another reason why I'm insistent on calling it my first horror film. I was too young to be watching it, I've got to admit. I'm 5, 6 years old, whatever I was. Most of the movie didn't bother me in terms of its gore and stuff, but there's one scene where the Terminator has to take his eye out because he's been damaged because of a car crash. That scene gave me at least one nightmare from what I can remember. I always had difficulty with that scene because we re-rented this film quite a few times throughout the mid to late 80s because we all loved it quite a lot in the house. And every time we got to that scene, I had a bit of trouble with it. But apart from that, it was all right. And I've loved this movie ever since. I've got it on my shelf. It is one of the best sci-fi horror films ever made. It's one of the best sci-fi films ever made. It's probably one of the best horror films ever made, if you're going to call it that. So yeah, Terminator 1 is the winner today. That was my ranking of the Terminator movies. I'll be back with another video very soon. I'll be back, I guess.